Okay, welcome back, everybody. We are ready to go ahead and begin our second half of our study session. Today is Friday, September 29th, 2023. It is 12:19 p.m. We are convened as the Provo City School District Board of Education. Today we're meeting at 940, oh gosh, I'm going to get the address wrong because I just second-guessed myself, 280 West, 940 North in Provo. We are going to go ahead and begin with a roll call. This time we'll start, well, I was going to start with Lisa, but she's under the table, so we'll start with Melanie again.
Melanie Hall, board member.
Meg Van Wagenen, board member.
Gina Hales, board member.
Wendy Dow, superintendent.
Rebecca Nielsen, board president.
Jennifer Partridge, vice president.
Terry McCabe, board member.
Lisa Boyce, board member.
Eric Anderson, business administrator.
All right, thank you for joining us, Lisa. We're glad to have you back. And everyone else in the room today, we have cabinet members, and we have Will Widener, our student board rep, and hopefully lots of people interested in watching this online. So we're going to, I'll entertain a motion to convene our study session.
I move that we convene the study session.
Okay, thank you. Motion made by board member Hales. Is there a second?
I second that.
Second by board member Partridge. We are now in our study session. We will go ahead and start with item 12 on our ongoing agenda, school fees with respect to travel policy update, and we'll give that time to our superintendent, Wendy Dow.
So this last week in policy committee, we talked a little bit about making some adjustments or a little more guidance when it came to student travel. And so I just kind of wanted to get a feel from the board as to what your priorities are in terms of student travel, because sometimes when you maximize opportunities for student travel, you're also increasing costs both for families as well as for the district as we cover students that are fee waived in this process. So I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about that and talk about what some other districts might be doing. I did, when we talked with the policy committee, I linked a couple of other district policies in terms of travel. Some districts in the past have limited how many trips a school can actually have in a given year, which I think just creates some haves and have-not situations a lot of times. Sometimes there are always caps on it, but they'll put like a 2-year cap, like over the course of 2 years you can't expend more than this amount of money, rather than putting mileage restrictions on it. I don't know, I would like us to update our policy, because I'm seeing paperwork coming in that seems to me that it is not making it clear to families that if their student is on a fee waiver, they are not expected to pay. They can, and fundraising can't be required. There's different things that I feel like our paperwork needs to be kind of modified to establish that more effectively. But I just wanted to know your thoughts on travel, and that we need to be really careful about if you want to make a restriction like there can only be 1 day in Disneyland instead of 2 days in Disneyland, or something like that, or it really has to be tied to educational objectives or things like that. I just want, as we're crafting a draft policy, I didn't want to start doing that without getting input from the full board. That's the purpose of this discussion. So go. Hey.
I have a question. Is there somewhere it says if there's equal opportunity here within the states, we would prefer the students do the in-state opportunity instead of going out of state?
There is nothing that says that in state code nor in policy, and I would say that we want to be really careful about that, because you would almost eliminate all travel as a result. So if that's your goal, then you would do that, because there are state competitions, but there are things that teams get invited to, and we need to recognize, like in athletics, part of the reason why coaches want to take students to outside events in other states is because that's where scouts go, and that's how students receive athletic scholarships in many cases, is because they go to a baseball tournament that's held at Cal State in Fullerton, and then there are a ton of scouts that are coming from there. If all of a sudden our district restricts that, those athletes will go to other districts to compete. So we want to be mindful that there are sometimes unintended consequences that come
I'm
from
not
that.
just talking about sports, I'm talking about other opportunities. Is there
There's nothing in
a
policy.
debate competition that's in-state instead of going out of state?
Almost everything that's UHSAA sponsored has a state level competition.
I would like to add that debate is technically a sport under the rules set forth by the UHSAA.
Good job, Will.
I guess I want to make a comment. I'm not interested in limiting kids to in-state. I think that opportunity to travel out of state not only gives them more opportunities for athletics and for, I mean, I guess I would want to say for recruiting and other purposes, but just an opportunity to see other things is really exciting, right? For kids who may never have left the state. I don't know. I don't mind them going out of state. You brought up Disneyland specifically. I'm going to go there. I am going to be the fun killer here, I guess. I 100% do not mind one day at Disneyland. I don't. It's a huge draw for kids and for students, and it's always the competitions are held at the Anaheim Convention Center, and so Disneyland is literally across the street. So I get it, and it doesn't bother me to have one day. But more than one day starts to feel excessive to me because truly these need to be educational opportunities, or they need to be opportunities related to the sport or furthering their, I don't know, their skills in this cheer competition or whatever it is. But Disneyland, now if there's, look, when I was growing up, I grew up next to Disneyland, and I did actual workshops at Disneyland where they taught us how to like perform and sing and be like Disney people, and then we got to go to Disneyland, right? Be like a cast member. So like that is an actual educational opportunity. But if we're just going, I feel like that's so far from an educational type or any kind of related activity. One day is cool with me.
Well,
I just really feel like we need to be careful about more than one day.
Yeah.
And the expense related to Disneyland is out of control, as we're trying to take our family and we still haven't ever gone because we just cannot stomach paying that much money. So anyways, and if we're relating to cost, it's going to take the cost out of control. That's my 2 cents on Disneyland specifically. You're all welcome to call me a fun killer. I don't know.
No, even like I've had my own kids go to national things for HOSA or other events, and 1 year at HOSA in Florida, I remember like I think there were like 3 or 4 park days. I was like, oh my gosh, that was very expensive for us to try to figure that out. And otherwise, my child, who did need to be there for the competition, was going to be sitting alone at the hotel while everyone else went to the park, right? And it was a small group. So those are things, I guess, to be mindful of as we think about what kind of guardrails do we put in place. I'm thrilled that my child did get to participate in a national HOSA competition. I saw the educational value of that in so many ways, and even still can see how that child benefited from that experience. So I'm not interested in canceling those things, but I do think we have to figure out how do we support making it something where, parents, because, even if we paid for my child to travel to their competition and do their competition, there needs to be something that says it's unreasonable to say they have to spend 3 days at 3 different parks, otherwise they sit alone while the other students are there. Do you know what I mean? Like, so some kind of balance for me, I think, in code, so we're consistent, would be good.
Go ahead, Jean.
Oops, sorry. Are park entrances included in the fees?
Yes, they would be. And anything that's tied to the travel, we would cover.
Yeah, I think then that I agree with what the 2 before us have said, that I think part of it's about controlling costs, and yeah, I agree. And I would just like to add that I would like to see a demonstration of the skills that President Nielsen learned at her Disneyland internship.
You guys, I could give you a classic, outstanding rendition of Zippity Doo Dah that I learned at Disneyland when I was 12. I could still do the routine.
But you need to dress up.
But I'm not gonna. But good try.
I just have 2 questions. One, are we still going to limit it to the lower 48 states?
That's entirely up to you.
Because right now it's still that way. I know that I think we should. I think that helps bring costs down. I do know though that there's been questions, you know, like asking if the Timpview football team can go to Hawaii. They've been invited, but that's a huge, huge expense.
I can also say that when I was in high school and the Berlin Wall fell, the choir had an opportunity to go sing in Eastern Europe for the very first time. And that was a huge opportunity. But if they would have followed this policy, they wouldn't have been able to do that. But if there's going to be opportunities like that, where you can go into, you know, Eastern Europe for the first time in 50 years, then we should allow that kind of experience.
I mean, taking a whole group to Eastern Europe though is, I mean,
Incredibly expensive.
that's a large expense.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that it isn't a great opportunity, you know, but so my follow-up question though too is, how much money have we spent over the last couple years since we have the new fee policy, where like how much has our district had to pay out for kids that are on fee waivers?
So I think Derek told me that we had about $500,000 in fee waivers, is that right?
Correct.
So I don't know what travel is of that, but we can find out that number specifically. I know, looking at a less impacted district with more students, it usually ended up being between 300 and 350,000 is what you were covering. But also recognizing that I do think coaches and advisors really do try very hard to find fundraising opportunities to try to bring down those costs. I think the concern that I also have with that is that's just another cost to the parent, because you're just going to family members a lot of times. So unless it's something that's really wide scale, it doesn't burden, you know, like I'm going to sell candy bars, you're going to sell it to people you know, right? And so that's not always helpful. So
I think we should also look at having something in policy about the frequency of specific groups going on the larger trips or the more expensive trips. I don't know exactly how we would phrase it, but you know, a high school student who participates in a performing arts or sport all 4 years, I don't know that they need to travel that experience to travel to California every single year. And obviously a specific national competition that you've been invited to might be a little bit different, but just say, hey, we're taking the choir on this amazing opportunity to New York or whatever. It's a great opportunity, but student doesn't need to do that every single year. So how we can write that into policy so they get that opportunity, but we're also balancing that.
There's probably a couple of ways you can do that. You can limit the mileage at which you travel, although I don't necessarily think that is always helpful, because sometimes going to Las Vegas is just as expensive. But you can do it so it's like, here's the maximum amount for travel that's allowed, and then the next year, if you utilize that maximum amount over the course of 2 years, you can't exceed this amount. So it would control the cost. So it doesn't necessarily mean you can't travel every year. It might mean you're not going on a big trip every year, where you could put in policy each group only travels every other year if you wanted to. I think you will have a lot of opposition, I think, from some coaches and advisors for that.
How does international language travel currently work? Because I know like German program at Timpview, they go to Germany like every summer.
I can talk to it because I had 2 children do it. It was not sponsored through the school district.
Okay.
It's called GAP, the German American PP. I don't know what it stands for. Partnership program or something. Yeah. But it's not sponsored through Timpview itself. So, and they were very clear at the very beginning when we signed up for it, this was not a Timpview sponsored thing. So there was no fee waivers or anything that was for that.
Okay, so the point of this discussion is to try and figure out how to balance cost with opportunity, right? So
I just wanna know which of those two is your greater priority, cause one of them's gonna have to be sacrificed a little bit. So is it
Well,
maximizing those opportunities, or is it really controlling the cost for families and for the district?
tell me real quick, what what has been what has been a really big burden on the district just so far? The cost? I mean, I guess that's what I'm asking, like, why are we, has there been a big problem so far? Is it just that we've put a lot of money into fee waiver students, or is it just that we are worried about it getting out of control? I kind of just want to frame, like, what is our big problem we're trying to solve? I get that we want to, balance that, but is there something that is prompting this?
I wanna make sure we understand what our purpose is, so that when an advisor submits that travel proposal and follows all of those guidelines, we're not questioning what it is that they're doing. That we trust that they have followed these protocols and there should be no reason to block that travel. That's really what I'm going for there.
I think even with fee waivers, we need to be conscious about, families that, even though I may not qualify for fee waivers, that's another added cost that I have to come up with.
Absolutely, yeah.
And if you have a child that's doing multiple sports, choir, all those things, they start adding up, and you have multiple children, it adds up.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I experienced that.
Yes.
Sports my kids do. So then, oh, you know what? I just lost my train of thought. Someone else?
While you're
Lisa?
thinking of it, it sounds like what we want to do is clarify maybe even the form we create that's attached to whatever policy it is, and that form reflects the real questions we need answered, because then they'll be thoughtful as they fill that out, you know what I mean, and we'll be clear if it meets the criteria or not.
So that is, I guess, where my thoughts were. Do we also want to look at, because right now advisors can bring a travel request to us 3 times a year. Do we want to look into adjusting how many times they can they just bring it whenever? And do we want to have a certain amount of notice before, because I don't want people bringing me a trip a month before it happens, right? We want to have, and I don't know if, I can't remember if that's in there right now or not.
It just says it has to be submitted 7 days before the board hears it, but I don't know if I'm sure there's a 30-day or 45-day would be my guess.
And then the other thing there that now why is my brain malfunctioning? Because there was one more caveat I was thinking of adding with that was, it's too late in the day now, I guess.
It's
Well, there was
policy 4006.
Oh, thank you, that's what I was looking for.
You're welcome.
It was the frequency by which they come to our meetings. It was also how much time they have to. Oh, but then also, like, we also need to build in some flexibility, because there are those cases where, hey, we won the science bowl at the state level and now we need to go to the national competition, and it is in 2 weeks, right?
Yes.
Like, so sometimes there are those last minute things. So I guess we need to have some kind of flexibility in there for those types of exceptions, but I don't know where to draw the line. We need to start drawing lines. I don't know where to draw all these lines.
Do we have a line for maximum expense for a trip? Like, is there?
We have, on our school fees, we have those max amounts per
Right, but
program.
like, let's say, like, the choir tour wants to go, and is there a maximum fee? Like, it cannot exceed this amount of money. Otherwise, you're gonna have to rearrange it.
Done that with a trip specifically. We've just done that with each program, according to like state law, right? Like our max that we established as a board, I think, was $5,000, right? And we try to keep it high.
That's
so
for total though, but I'm just saying,
right.
like,
I think that's all we have.
if on that form that we're talking about, it says, is it under this amount of money?
I would recommend that we do that.
So that's
That
what I'm trying to get to.
That would be my
So you're saying no trip ever is over
X amount of money,
$2,000
yes,
or whatever.
or over
Okay.
$2,000.
And I think you actually, what would help is, like, we have these instances where then someone will decide, all of a sudden, an opportunity will come up to travel and it wasn't adopted in the fee schedule, and then we're having to go back. I just think as a part of every group's fee schedule, they need to put in, the school just needs to put in what is the maximum cost that would go in, knowing that they might not travel that year, or it might be less than that, but I think traditionally most districts put an amount, and right now most districts are hovering between $1,700 and $2,000 for a trip.
Will, did you have a comment?
Would it be possible for, say, with the example you brought up of Science Bowl, if it's a qualifying tournament, that they would just fill that out in the same form. So it's, if we do win this competition, then we are eligible. We can just have them put that in at the
That's a good
beginning.
idea.
That makes sense. So after this discussion, I just assume the policy committee will draft a policy based on kind of what we're talking about and bring it back, right?
Hey, can we limit the number of trips per group to like one?
Absolutely.
So that football can only do one trip? Or, I'm just saying, like, that reduces the cost on family too.
We
And
do have the cap on 3 trips per student, right?
right, but if
Per
I mean,
school year.
I guess there would be exceptions for like Science Bowl, like if they would do the state competition, if they win there, they go to nationals, that would be 2. But I'm just thinking with most groups, I think we can limit it to 1, and with exceptions that they make it onto the next round or something.
So let me give you an example of where that might be problematic. And Daryl, you might have to help me out. So let's assume that there is, and it could be based, and we might have to change this depending on what the classifications are of the school, but if a school has to travel to St. George for a region tournament or a semifinal game, and they're going to stay overnight, does that now qualify as their one overnight trip? Because sometimes you'll have those situations where they might be traveling 3 or 4 hours, and it might be safer for everyone involved, because then you can take a school bus rather than a charter bus that actually saves you money, and you stay overnight. Is it, is that an exception because it's just part of UHSAA competitions, or what, what does that look like? Or if you're looking at a group that might go to a regional competition, if they win the regional competition, like robotics does this, they'll win the regional competition in like Idaho, and then they'll have to travel to Texas or to New Orleans or something for a national competition. So and the reason I ask that is because it seems like, well, of course we would allow that, but I am telling you that there are teams that will then come out and say, well, we won a regional cross country, and now we had qualifiers for nationals, and so we went to regionals that was in California, and now we would like to go to nationals, which is in New Jersey or something like that, so I want to anticipate that, because then you're going to have people appealing it, and those appeals are going to come probably to me and Jared and Daryl, and I hate appeals.
So see, that's where I feel like flexibility would come in, and where it makes sense on what Lisa was saying is that if this is all built into the form, right? So if you have a question on the form like, has your team already been on a trip this year? If so, how many, right? And if someone comes in and says, well, we've already been on 6 trips, right? And that's part of required. And we go, well, what's the 7th for? Well, for fun. Well, no, right? And we have the flexibility to maybe approve or deny based on all the details we see in the form.
And I mean, I have no problem in there that we give the superintendent the ability to make adjustments as needed in the form. Like, if
you mean before we see it, or you mean the actual form itself?
If it comes to us and they're doing something in St. George for a region thing, that's understandable. Most of our teams are not playing people down in St. George for region. Those are just tournament competition games that would be for travel, for fun purposes. I mean, and that's why I say we could give you permission to make those calls when it's an actual region or state. I know.
Do you want that
No, I
responsibility?
really don't.
Well, isn't the example of one of the basketball teams recently switched their trip from like California to Las Vegas or Arizona, or what was it? I can't remember.
Sarasota.
They just switched their trips. I mean, it was like at the exact same time, so they.
Right.
Yeah.
And they brought it to us. That I don't like that. Will, you had your hand raised.
Yeah. You brought up that if like a team comes in and they've already gone to 6 things, like we're not going to prove that, but I think part of that is they come in and they kind of like guilt trip us, and it's like, oh, it's a great opportunity, and it's like we can't say no, because especially when it's in the situation where it's like, oh, it's 2 weeks, they've been so excited for it, or like it's in 2 weeks, so maybe we need to build more guardrails, and you need to bring this to us within like 60 days of it happening so we can actually look at it and make a more informed decision.
Yeah, and I think we have a 3 month, is it 3 months? Right now, it should be 3 months out.
Which is still fairly a small window of time to fundraise and,
Yeah.
right?
But we've also made some exceptions.
We
in the
have, you're
past,
right.
which
Yep.
is-
You're right.
We have.
Darrell, you have lots of opinions about school travel. I would like to hear them.
You guys are all talking about the right things. I just think the key word is there's a couple qualify, right? If they qualify for something, and a lot of times when you qualify for something, there is incentives such as money, travel, and things like that that come your way. So I don't know. I think that's one thing you need to make sure you take into account is the cost still, right? Even though you qualify, that doesn't mean you have to go, but it usually doesn't require money. So, you know, I think one thing that was mentioned is multiple travel opportunities within the same year. I think the one thing that we would try to avoid is if a baseball team went to St. George for 3 days and then all of a sudden a month later wanted to go to San Diego for 3 days, right? That's different than the qualifying for an event. So that's where I would see that. And I don't know that I love, this is not my take, but limiting numbers. I like cost over limits. Like, let's look at cost
Cost
rather than
limitations versus numbers of trips limits.
before we limit opportunities for students. I think if you just keep that in mind, I think it will help guide those appeals and those decisions.
Well, and I just want you to know that teachers and coaches are very creative. So, like, I'll give you a great example. Choir would go to a trip usually back east, but then they would also be able to go to St. George because what they would do is they would label it Shakespeare Club, and they would take dance and choir and band and orchestra and theater. And so they were going as a Shakespeare group. Now choir gets to travel twice, theater gets to travel twice. So how come football doesn't get to do that? Like, I'm just telling you, they're going to be really creative. I probably shouldn't be giving people these ideas, but these are all the things that I help my teachers do to get around the district policy. And so I was a principal trying to work through that.
One more thing like that is more groups are traveling because more groups have been created through Utah High School. I mean, within the last 2 years, we've had 5 or 6 new sanctioned sports come on board. So limiting numbers would also, we need to make sure we're understanding that part. A lot of club sports are now sanctioned sports, and what you decide to do as a school with your club, that's a whole different animal. So.
And I don't mind having like some financial guardrails in place. I think it's great for us to make sure we're using money in ways that support our kids. I also think if these travel experiences really are educational, and it's not problematic, then I don't think we limit it because I don't know, I think these are important learning opportunities. I always think that more can be learned if you're actively involved in something, and I like different perspectives and I like being with other students. So unless it's becoming a problem, which of course, like, let's make sure we're clear ahead of time about what qualifies and doesn't. But then, I mean, I'm supportive of student groups traveling when they can. I think it's great for them.
So my last question is this: I see a lot of travel. I know there's a limit on how many days of school students are supposed to miss, but I'm seeing that when we're not in school, nobody cares how many days it is. I do care about that because it's added expenses. You're adding for food every time, you're adding for that. Is there any reason to, I mean, you could limit to 2 school days. Do you feel like there should be a limit on the, and recognize as soon as we say this is a Washington DC middle school trip, you know, type of thing, but it does increase the cost the longer people are away.
So I was going to say the exact same thing. and I had the DC trip in mind, which I think is incredible, and I think it's such a good trip. So I hate to limit the days. They typically go for 7, which isn't crazy. But I think if we put in those cost guidelines, then, I mean, right now, the DC trip this year for Centennial is $2,000, and for Dixon is gonna be about 18. So it's, I mean, they couldn't do more if they wanted, and if things keep going like they've been going, that means 5 days next year instead of 7 anyways, right? So I'm okay with not limiting time if we're making sure we limit cost.
I think we do have to limit like number of days missed of school though.
I think I'm
for
good
sure
with the 2
we need
days.
to add
We're
to
at
2
days,
days
and I like that.
and
Yeah.
do not increase that because we want kids in school. That's part of our whole plan.
But is that per trip or is that per year?
Per trip.
Per trip.
So we could have a kid be in a bunch of different things and miss 10 days of school.
But they are limited to three
trips
so
per year.
Is
Oh,
that's current policy?
So
Oh.
then they wouldn't miss more than 6.
That's part of the stuff we did with when we did the adjustments for state law, right? We put in the $5,000 cap, and we put in the 3-day or 3 trips.
How
That's
are
when we put that in.
how are we monitoring that? The 3
Okay.
trips. I'm just saying like
Bonnie monitors it. She keeps a spreadsheet of everything, and so
She looks so like a.
she's like,
No,
yeah, sure I do.
I'm honestly just thinking about this like I'll just use my daughter as an example. Okay, she's on volleyball, so they did her volleyball trip. She's in choir, she's going to go on a choir trip. She does basketball, she could go on a basketball trip. She could do track. I'm just saying, okay, that could be 4.
Good.
It could, but who's
I
monitoring
don't
this?
think anybody's monitoring it, to be quite honest, so
So-
I'll write that down. Who's monitoring?
Could that be part of, isn't Caleb gonna help put everything electronically? Should they have to then include their student ID number and then maybe that can track at least how many requests they have? Caleb, you're
There's a lot of
like a
forms
superhero, right? You can do that.
putting into the
We can figure out a way to do it.
Yeah, putting every student's ID number is,
Well, there are multiple ways we can set up these forms, right, to where they have workflows, right, and approval processes before they move on to the next round or the next phase for approval, right? And the other thing, by moving them electronically, we can also then push it into Domo, so that way we can see, what trips, these programs took and how much they cost and how many students went on them and things like that. So if we start moving towards that, we can get all of this data very, very quickly at our fingertips. So.
And one thing I think it would be great to attach to this in terms of how we communicate out to people participating, would tie it to the attendance policy and make sure that our students know you don't go on a trip if your attendance isn't, if you haven't done whatever kind of attendance recovery is required of the school to participate, because the way, that's
we do that
written.
with athletics.
Yeah,
and
then I
grades
think
and
we
stuff,
just
so.
need to make sure that people know they're not going on a trip if their attendance isn't where it needs to be.
Okay, last comment, we really need to move on.
Tiffany has been very clear about that. We had a presentation where it was like, and they legitimately, it was like a list of 20 different activities, and then it said and others, but each activity they went through and was like, you cannot do this if your attendance is below this. You cannot,
working.
so, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, this helps.
All right. Item number 13 on our agenda, tax strategy. We will give that time to Derek Anderson.
Okay, and I'm gonna project, really quickly. You all have a single page PDF of what I've got, but there's gonna be other things that I'm gonna go into, so let me get this pulled up. Okay. So what you see here currently, right, is I want to show you something, is our tax rate breakdown. Okay, this is our tax rate broken down by the 4 tax tranches that our board has ultimate final say on what that rate is. Okay. So last year you can see our total rate based on the breakout was the 0.005575. Okay, and that's also in the graph as part of that picture, so you can just kind of see that if you need to. Then and there's the breakdown. The current year, you can can see it went up, and you're gonna wonder, why did our tax rate go up and we didn't go through truth and taxation? That's because our property values declined, okay? And so because of that, it automatically pushed the rate up, right? We didn't raise taxes, it just, because the values came down just a little bit, it pushed our rate up just a little bit, okay? So that's what that is. But the big change I'm pointing out here is, you see how our voted levy went from 0.00587 to 0.0013, okay? By me doing that, what it's doing is it's brought in an additional $2.5 million, okay? This is not in our budget yet, but and it will be there in the final part of the year, but we just got confirmation that we are gonna get this, okay? So, here's the thing though, and the reason I'm bringing this to you is that amount, that 13.0013, is the amount that the public voted us to go up to, okay? In state law, we can go legally up to 0.0016 if our public has given us that authority. But as of right now, they've only given us authority to go up to 0.0013, okay? So, my proposal is that we go to the public and ask them to give us the 0.0016, but what we will do is drop our board levy by the exact same amount. And so what you see here is the actual tax rate is the exact same from this year to next year, but by restructuring our tax rates, we'll get, on top of the 2.5 we are getting this year, we'll get an additional 3.6 next year. Now, we're not gonna be able to get it next year due to the election timing. It would be more like the following year, so in 2 years from now. But we should be hammering everybody in this public, the city council, every person with any kind of political power, we should be getting behind this, because it will not cost our taxpayers a cent, and we'll get an additional $3.6 million for our districts. Not just that 1 year, every year in perpetuity, if this is managed properly. So.
Question.
Yes.
When you changed from last year to this year on the voted, where did we make up the difference?
Capital. Look at the capital one.
In the capital.
Yep. The
Okay.
1847 down to the 1229.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Question.
So nothing changed there.
No,
except for the rates just changed because of property value, but otherwise it was the same as before. It was a literal shifting of numbers from here to here.
Yes.
That's it.
Yes.
Okay.
And we're still paying. That money that I shifted over and moved around is still paying for capital. And you'll see in our financials where I show that there's a shift back over, right? So it's still being accounted and paid for capital things. It's just by redoing this, I brought in an additional $2.5 million. And that will happen every year going forward, so long as that's managed correctly.
Okay, and people are aware of this. Right?
This right here is 100% legal in state law. It's outlined in state code.
And you've checked with the state, and they're gonna.
Oh yeah,
we're getting the.
This is well defined. This piece right here is well defined in state.
So we're not doing anything wrong.
Nothing is doing anything wrong on this one. This is something. So here's what happened. Okay, this is called the guarantees, right? The voted and board guarantees. So you hear a lot about that program. Okay. Now the reason and the design of that program was to say, public, if you authorize and grant your district to tax up to this amount, because you have said you are willing to give that effort of taxing effort, the state will kick in money, okay? And that's the way this code is outlined to work, just like this, okay? And a lot of districts in the past, to get these rates, approached it that way. Public, give us this rate for the first time and we will take it from our board, or we will take it from capital, and it won't cost you anything, but we'll start getting money. And the state has never balked at districts getting that rate for the first time, approaching it that way.
So my question is if we were to need to go out for truth and taxation for raises or something, what $3.5 million would be what I mean, not saying that we're allocating this just to teacher salaries, but like if we were to go, we're at $55,000 start right now, right, Jason?
We're 55.7.
Okay, so we're almost 56,000, but if we wanted to raise that maybe to 58, how much money would we need to get to that
I
point?
don't know on the top of my head.
Okay,
I've calculated everything based off of lifetime earnings, because our lifetime earnings are what is so far behind. Yes, what happens is our starting salaries, it's really easy to make your starting salaries look in line and comparable, right? If you've got a lot of money, because I can suppress my early salaries and say, hey, look, we're just leave our early salaries not touched. We're gonna leave it down at 40,000 so we can complain that we aren't getting enough money to pay our teachers. But then really quickly behind the scenes ratchet that up and not tell everybody, right? And so really what you see is we're fairly in line with our starting salaries, but what happens is really quickly these other districts ratchet it up to the point where all of a sudden there's a $10,000 and $12,000 gap per year. So.
But I think what you're asking, right, is how would we, if we wanted to describe to the public kind of what they're paying for or buying in a sense for the district, if we could say this would buy every teacher X
we can draft
pay
that
raise. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, I just want so that they can see that, hey, by doing this, we don't have to ask you for more money.
Correct.
For this X amount of money that we would normally have to come ask for you through truth and taxation.
And there's a lot that I've got in here in terms of how to get to where we're at, right? I don't see us needing to raise taxes on our public for quite a while.
And so to be clear, I want to make sure everyone understands, this is something we would go to the public for. It would be on a ballot. Right, it would be a ballot, it would be a campaign. I mean, some of us have done that before with bonding and whatnot. It is a big deal. It is to go out and ask the public for something like this, right? So just to be clear that everyone understands, that's how this would happen, is we would have to do that. And while we have good reason and whatnot, it would also mean though that we would have to educate the public well enough so that they could understand. Because I had no understanding of this and still feel like maybe I don't even fully, even being on the board for almost 7 years. So like it would be a big education effort to get people to understand exactly what we're doing and why and how it would benefit them. So to your point, Melanie, we would need to have good messaging for sure.
So Derek's explained this to the finance committee like what, 3 times? And I'm barely starting to understand it.
Right.
It's confusing.
So it would have to be a really good educational campaign.
Yes.
I mean, I understand that this is a net zero, but it's net zero to the taxpayers, but we actually get a $3.5 million increase. But at the same time, I don't want the taxpayers to say, well, we're never going to ask to come back to you because we may need to.
There's always potential in the future, right? With bonds or whatever. Yes, for operations, I should leave it at that, right?
Yeah.
For operations, depending on a few things, I don't see us needing it, depending on what some decisions are for a few years. So.
Right, I think that would be our biggest battle, is we tell them we're going to do this here, but we can't guarantee that.
We can't guarantee,
right,
and we can't guarantee that the state's not going to get wind of this and then change the law.
Well, this is very well defined in state law. This piece right here is very well defined in state law, and is actually this spreadsheet. Okay, because here's what happened is I've been on a working group with the state on this whole thing, because there's been some discussion about potentially changing this formula with the state and how all the districts work. And so as I was on this work group working with them, it was after the fact, after I'd already made this shift, he sent me this spreadsheet and said, hey Derek, I'm looking at your last year's rates. Do you know that if you did this, this is what would happen? This is actually their spreadsheet. Okay? All I've done is add this graph to it and create this one tab to pull these over. But everything else is the state spreadsheet, and that is actually their calculation.
So could every district in the state do this? And
every district in the state could do this if they meet all the guidelines in terms of property valuations, in terms of tax rates. There's a bunch that goes behind the scenes, but every district in the state has the opportunity to do this if they have the right qualifications in the guarantee program.
It's just a matter of them understanding.
Correct.
How to get it done.
Correct.
Can I ask to clarify, and maybe it can't be done right now, so the new money though, if we're not raising no extra cost tax-wise for our constituents, that's just the state money that's making up that gap?
This is state money.
State money,
giving
so
us
that the
money.
new money is the state money to say, okay, we're gonna get you to this voted
Guaranteed.
rate, guaranteed.
The guarantee rate, we will, that's the way, the way, I can dive in to how the formula works, okay? So the way it works is, they look at our total values, right, over the whole district, okay? And they say, all right, based off your values, if you tax this rate, we assume you should generate X dollars, okay? But what happens is because our values don't generate X dollars, there is what's called the guarantee rate. And so what they do is they take the guarantee rate and they multiply it by the number of students that we have to get that Y, right? So then what they do is they take Y minus X to see if there's a zero or any left over. That left over is that amount, state contribution amount.
Okay. So
when do we need, I guess
Yeah.
my question, when do we need to start campaigning
So
for
I've
this?
already got an email out to the state, not the state, the county, asking what the timeline is to get on the ballot and what are all the requirements to do something, okay? So I'm waiting to hear back from them as to when we can, what that process is, but it will be something that internally we'll wanna start thinking through how we wanna message, what kind of distribution we wanna be able to hand out, things like that, because the process to get onto the ballot and go is gonna be pretty much just filling it out. This is what we want. This is what we want the language to say. Boom, by X date, and then it's on the ballot. But the bulk of the work is gonna be us getting a clear message and getting it out to the public to get them to support it.
And we've talked about timeline before. We're thinking 25, right? Or are we thinking 24?
I mean, we can approach this however way we want, right? I think if we can make it to where this is understandable, this is a slam dunk. Nobody in our public is gonna shut this down, even in a high presidential election number, right? But it just comes down to, and we have a messaging, and we have a fairly educated populace in this community. So I think that our public will be able to get behind it when we get the messaging correct.
I think equally important to how we message that out, though, is the language used as this is written up for the ballot. Because, we can say this, but if we don't write this down in a careful enough way that there are clear expectations around what a school board could or couldn't do in the future, I would feel skeptical. I would feel worried. Like, does the language of the way it's written for the ballot do what it needs to do and nothing more? Just to protect taxpayers, right?
We may be legally bond, like how we
It'll
say
be
it, what the
Okay.
language is on the ballot. There's like a way you have to say it. Like
Yes.
we may not
Okay.
be able to, and that's where the messaging before it comes out. So when they go to check yes or no, do I support it? They're like, oh, I already know about this. Yes, I'm going to support it.
Right, it's the campaign that will educate people. It's not gonna be the ballot
Yeah,
language.
so
Because we're going to be limited to what the legal
Okay.
term.
words we're allowed to say on there.
Right. So Derek, are you looking for a directive to go ahead with this? Is that what you want from us today?
It would be the ask, I guess, is a directive to be able to move forward on this and start working to put together essentially messaging and advertising campaign, look at timelines, and bring a proposal back on when to approach this.
Okay. Everybody feel good giving him the directive to go ahead? Meg, did you have something else you wanted to say?
Yeah, just, I guess this is maybe part of figuring out the messaging. What pushback do we anticipate? Just not quite understanding, suspicion, wary that we're trying to do something that's not on the up and up? I'm just kind of when, I guess I can see where you have, something seems like a slam dunk, it's like, there's gotta be a there's gotta be a
Well,
cost
if you're
somewhere,
worried
you
that
know?
the board's gonna increase and not decrease,
That's
The
the
other.
big concern.
Right, because
Okay,
we,
thank you.
that's what we can't guarantee is while we would increase the one, or we would tell the public that will we be
But on levy,
decreasing the
well, we
other.
can- okay.
But that's not, but, and we might be able to do that
But
for a
we
year or
can't
two.
hold other boards
Thank you.
to doing that in the future.
Right, in the future.
Once the,
see.
once
Okay.
the public votes to raise the cap, right, while this board may say, yes, we will decrease the
I see.
board
The
levy by
the
that
the
amount.
truth in taxation.
In the future, a board can say, all right, well, we're gonna keep it at 16, but we'll just keep raising the board levy up and up
And
and
we're,
up.
we're
Okay.
capped at, on our board levy, we're capped at .0025.
Correct.
So we could, we have that
We have
ability to
some-
ratchet that with,
Yeah.
and we do that one with truth in taxation.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you, that is the piece I was missing.
That's where you would get pushback for
Yeah,
sure.
okay.
People just not trusting that we
Yes.
would actually equalize to what we
That we
currently
would
have.
pull a different
That
lever.
we would, yeah.
But
we
it
can't
gives us-
promise what someone else
But
will do.
it gives
Right.
us more flexibility in the future to ratchet the board.
And part of the
But-
argument is right now, we're not even at our board levy max, right? So if we're not at our board levy max, the potential for us to hurry up and just turn around and re-ratchet it right back up, it isn't there just because we're not in the current situation where we're capped, right? We already have gap to where if we wanted to raise taxes, we could raise taxes right now and not be limited by the public. Yeah, and not have to go for the vote.
I just have to say, this sounds great, I'm fine moving forward with it, however, I still encounter lots of mistrust from the public. This is gonna be a huge ask, and it's not just my neighborhood, I know my neighborhood is not happy with us, but also, it's all over it's all over the city. So this is gonna be big, like, I don't know what our chances are.
That's that's why I say, having lived through the last one or two bond campaigns too, I should say having survived, that it would have to be a very, very good educational campaign, which would probably cost money, which I don't think the district itself could actually pay for, right? Like, that would have to be a private group.
Well, so we could hire an outside advertising agency to help draft the messaging and easily work on
We can
messaging.
tell the message of what's on our
That's right, the
ballot,
district can
right?
tell the message, but,
We can't tell them how to vote, we can tell them the pros and cons of both.
okay, so we can educate, but we can't
We can
persuade.
educate, but we can't persuade, but we can
Right.
give them the directive, like send out a flyer that says, these are the pros, these are the cons.
Well, and
And-
for when you're, exactly, on something like a ballot measure, it's right, we have no problem or every authority to put out messaging, right? There's nothing against us putting out messaging on something like this. What we won't be able to do is kind of what Melanie alluded to, is the language at the ballot box will be essentially very restricted to what is law says. So like, kind of like when you go to a bond, right, they have some very specific language that you've gotta have.
But on our last, on the one bond campaign, there was private citizen groups that did the actual campaigning, and that's for a reason,
Told
because
people
there's
to
a
vote
rule,
yes or
right?
to vote no.
So,
You can't tell people how to vote, you can say, this is what we're asking for, this is what the money would be used for.
Yep.
So
Okay.
information is fine, but you can't say, we would
vote
like you
yes
to
or
vote
whatever,
yes.
okay, okay.
And to Melanie's point, do pros and cons, like, you know, you would wanna be really transparent that you can't hold a future board to what
Yeah.
we're deciding to do. I think that's important to just be upfront about that.
Yeah, okay. Jennifer?
My suggestion is this is good to know about and have information, but that we should sit on it and, cause if we would do it, we have time to figure it out, right? So maybe we all kind of think it through. Maybe I'm sure we'll have people who are watching today that will give us feedback, and, you know, as we go through time and talk to people, then maybe we can get a sense of, do we wanna move forward on this or not?
Well, I won't know the timeline until I hear back, but it'll be, my guess is somewhere around May is when we're gonna have to know if we're gonna put it on the ballot for next year.
So is this something that we could add to our next all-day board meeting? That just to revisit it, because you'll have the dates and things like that. By that point, we won't have missed the deadlines, I don't think, in February or March. When is our next all-day meeting?
All-day meeting next one will be February or March.
Yeah.
It's typically when
Typically, we're trying to do that one after the legislative session's over now, right?
So probably March.
So it's in March, yeah.
The end of March. We'll have to figure out what that turnaround time is, what the timeline is, because to potentially turn something around between the end of March and let's say May, for something this big might be a very big lift, right? And so I would say let's figure out just what that timeline is and then determine when we want to come back.
Okay.
And I would think maybe we could identify some key groups like city council, et cetera, to have a set of conversations with to see what kind of support preliminarily or what kind of feedback we would get, even like here are some things you're maybe not thinking through before we push it out in March. So between now and March, I do think it's useful to go to, Chamber of Commerce, to go through different places and to explain this and say, and ask for feedback. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. So then, do we want to give Derek? Do we want to give Derek the go-ahead, or do we want to sit on it?
I'm okay going ahead with it, but that's my own opinion. I think it's worth getting it on the ballot for 2024, even, and getting those things. We could be out 3.5 million if we wait a year, which is a lot of money.
I do want us to consider the political impacts of doing this in 24. Not only is it going to be a controversial presidential election, because that's the only way we do presidential elections anymore, but we'll also have board members running, and that really could compromise board member campaigns. That's, as much as I hate to say it, it's a factor. And so I don't know, 25 is a less controversial time.
It is.
And we might be able to get people's attention more because people will be distracted by other bigger ticket items. And I don't know that they may give the same effort and attention to learning about this than they might in a off year. Maybe they would. Maybe, I don't know what statistics would say if they would give it more attention since it's going to be kind of a bigger election or not.
You get
more voters.
Definitely
You'll get more
voters
voters.
coming to vote on that off year.
Let that
But everyone's going to be grumpy and angry.
Well,
I mean, because it's a presidential year, and that's just kind of typical. So I just want us to consider the political impact, because unfortunately, this is a public thing.
Here's my question though: if we go out for it, it fails, do we just go for it again in 25?
Or we just
have to change our. I'm just saying,
right?
I just have a hard time saying we're not getting $3.5 million, which is a lot of money. I have a really hard time with that.
Gina?
Yeah.
I was gonna say, as someone whose seat is up in 24 and who's reluctantly considering another term,
Gina,
I'm
go.
okay putting it on the 2024 ballot if that's, I agree it's $3.5 million and it's a good excuse to fire me. If you don't get it, then fire me.
Gina.
I see value in going for it because we could only benefit, and yet I do worry about trust and it's not political, but like the community goodwill for our district, right? And so I personally would like to wait on this. I don't know that we need to wait till March. We could bring this back up in a few months, but do some of the groundwork to get a feel from people. I love that point, see from other people maybe things we aren't considering or other viewpoints on this. And then we could talk about this in a few months, and if we decide to move forward, we'd still have plenty of time to be able to hit all the deadlines for putting it on the ballot. One thing I would wonder, I'm new to the taxes part of all of this. If the board is considering truth in taxation next summer, then that seems like that would be poor timing with putting something like this on the ballot right after that. And I actually don't know how those decisions get made, but just something that I was just thinking of is we also should maybe we really do need to hear from a few other people around this and make sure we've got as much information as possible, at least to make the decision, but also information for us around what are our needs going to be. Is that a thing that we are considering for this coming summer, et cetera? Because I think that would impact for me as a voter if I felt like, well, you just raised my taxes and now you want me to give you the capacity to do that even more. I think that would impact my vote.
And I don't think moving forward putting together a strategy or messaging around this would hurt, because one thing we could do is move forward, develop a communication around this, and then pull focus groups in, like, the city council or people in the community that have the connections in a small group, to then potentially just say, what's your thoughts of this, right? To gain a temperature and then come back and decide based off of a lot of that feedback when the right time would be to approach it.
All right. I think my PTSD is speaking for me from these past
I guess my
campaigns.
textbook's speaking to me. I'm like, it's $3.5 million and we're talking
Right.
about all this FTE stuff, and I'm like, this could help solve some of that problem.
Yeah. No,
So
I agree.
For me, that's kind of where I'm at.
So are we mostly agreed then to give the directive to go ahead?
To go ahead and
Start.
look at the messaging, or to go ahead and.
Just working on the messaging, not going out anywhere by any means to the public and getting a timeline or anything like that. Just getting essentially a messaging around this, almost like a white paper, a single page white paper that could be used as a flyer to distribute for messaging around this.
And then
That would be brought back to the board first. Then what I would say is go to focus groups, small, bring that back to the board, then make a determination of when to go forward.
Okay.
So not that we're committing that we're doing it, but just committing to put more effort into
Yes.
finding out if we do want to.
Yes.
I think we do need to know what possible dates we would need to know for 2024 or 2025 for the focus groups, but also be aware that the focus groups for the strategic plan, and not do them at those focus groups at the same time.
Right.
Okay.
I imagine this happening afterwards.
Okay. Then I think we're okay to go ahead with that part. You guys see me getting so nervous. Okay. I'm not saying it's not a good thing. I just having to live through another campaign will be really difficult.
I get it.
Okay. Let's see. We have last item, the large purchase request, and Derek, will you speak to that as well?
Yes. Let me disconnect really quickly so we can get that back up there. All right, so what you have before you is 3 large purchase requests. One of them is for Temp-Views parking lot. Here's what's going on: is the back parking lot on the east side, over behind where the Thunderdome is, where all the things have been staged. They've pulled up the layer of asphalt and are ready to start putting in the asphalt for that back parking lot. But during the process of doing that, what they've found is there is not a good underlayment of soils. It is pure clay, and so it is essentially just like a wave when you drive on it. And so we're being.
Sorry, is this where the driver's ed?
Yes, up by
It's like the
Thunderdome.
Thunderdome parking
Yeah,
lot,
the back
or
of
not
Okay.
the Thunderdome,
back
like
behind there,
yeah, the one on the
Yep,
the
up
most
against the
northern
hill.
parking lot, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, the east parking lot up
Sorry,
against
east.
the hill. You're good.
Oh my gosh.
So it's clay,
I
and
know my directions, I swear.
to do it properly, it would mean that kind of like what we've been dealing with up there, right? As we've been putting in a lot of the helical piers and things for settling. Well, for a parking lot like this, to prevent the expansion and cracking and settling, is really what we need to do is pull out about 1 foot of clay that's back there. and put in essentially engineered fill that is compacted to 95%, so that way it doesn't move, and that way that parking lot that we do put in actually lasts the expected useful life, because if we don't do it, then what ends up happening is those parking lots deteriorate much quicker, okay? And so this is an ask to be able to put in that underlayment system of that engineered fill in the tune of 249,000 and some change. Let me look it up really quick.
347.
What was that?
249, 347.
Thank you.
Can I make a comment?
Yes.
And a question. First question. Did our other parking lots that have already been repaved at Timview need the same thing?
So I would have to, most of the time you want a good subgrade. I
Right.
don't know.
No, I fully understand why we have to do this, and I don't disagree that we should. My comment is, how do we not know this was gonna be a problem when the entire point of rebuilding the school was because it was under clay? So like, did the other,
So-
I mean, on top of clay, were the other parking lots not like this? Is it really actually specific to that parking lot?
Yeah, so it's
Or-
specific to that parking lot,
Okay.
and it could be a combination. I can go back and ask, but it may be that this parking lot, when it was originally put in, did not have the engineered fill put in underneath it, whereas the other ones did. I'd have to go back and figure out as to why these ones did not need it and that one did. I don't know that one off the top of my
I mean, I
head.
know soils can be different, even like
Yeah.
3 feet from each other.
Yep.
So I just wanna know, that's all I wanna know, like, did we not know this out of neglect, or did we not know this out of, we really thought that the parking lots had been done correctly before?
I think
Or maybe
that
the
is the
soils
one.
just in that spot is just worse.
From what it was explained to me is that they did not realize that it was all clay underneath there.
Okay.
And so once they got it, that top asphalt layer off, then they realized, oh, wow, to do this correctly, we're gonna have to redo all this.
Are we gonna run into the same problem with the main parking lot when the old building part comes down?
We will find out.
So that's not part of the
Original bids.
original bid, does not have the sub part
Correct.
in there, so there's a good chance you could come back to us for that parking lot as well.
Correct.
Which I feel like
Yay.
there's high chances, cause that was the problem in the first
that's
place,
where the
with the
clay is.
whole southern section of the
Yeah,
school.
that part of the school is clay.
Okay.
So, okay.
Fun.
So that is the first one. The second one is at Wasatch, and it is a very similar type of thing. It is, I believe this one is 149,000 and some change, but it's essentially for the same thing, subgrade underneath where asphalt will be. And that one isn't due to the soil being bad, it was just missed in the bid, okay? The contractor missed it in the bid. So this is now coming back on us because and the reason why it's on us, okay, and here's a huge misconception in construction projects, okay, is when you do a hard bid, it essentially locks in the price, okay, meaning if they miss something, just like your home, it is on the contractor, you deal with it, you missed it. But when you do a CMGC, it actually puts the risk back on us for these types of things, unless it is something that was designed improperly. Like, you know, this engineer didn't design something correct, they've got to go and now make it hit their insurance because they designed it incorrectly.
And we didn't do a hard bid because when we were doing all this bidding, no one would let us because it was like in the middle of the COVID crazy price variations, and so
Oftentimes on these big construction projects, they don't do a hard bid.
they'll never do a hard bid.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a question. So this isn't the fencing, so this is
Nope.
115,
The fencing is the
and the fencing
115,
is
or that the other
147.
one? Did I get them mixed up?
The asphalt is 115, is that right?
Okay, so
But
it's
what does it mean when it says deduct from contingency?
So contingency is we have budget set aside, right, for every
Okay.
construction project for stuff like this, okay? So this is not gonna be asking to increase the cost of the project. This will be coded to the contingency budget. So I apologize, I mixed those two up. It's 115 on this one and 149 on the fencing.
I hope we don't have construction projects for a long time after this, but how do we avoid this in the future? How do we make sure that this gets, I could look at all those papers and we'd miss lots more stuff if I was the one doing it. How do we avoid this in the future?
Slow down.
Okay. And have someone else look at it?
So here, it's developing a process way beforehand, to slow a lot of this stuff down, right? A lot of big organizations like universities or hospitals that are doing this, oftentimes will have plans years in advance completed and designed before they go into these projects. What we are doing and school districts have been doing is, hey, let's go through with this project, hurry up and design it and vote on it and go. There's not a lot of time, right? So really what we should be doing is, whatever it is that we're considering in 3 years, 4 years, 6 years down the road, start getting designs engineered ahead of time, have the plans reviewed. You can even have a second review, right, to then go and see what has been potentially missed. Then as you bid them out, you have another group vetting and analyzing all the bids to make sure that everything was actually captured in part of it, or the prices are all where they should be, things like that.
Is that a realistic thing that school districts can really do when we're subject to bonds or,
So,
you know what I mean?
yep.
Like,
So
can we really actually, or when we don't want to go out and pay for plans if we don't even know if we're going to have this approved by the public? See,
So
like I'm not trying to say we can't go slower, but I also think the going slow, like none of us have any control over that. We just approve it, right?
Yep, that's correct. And so here's what I would say is, and that's partly why we've been trying to develop these processes around our facilities and handling our capital and whatnot, because we know in the future already some ideas of what we want to do, okay? And to get estimates and plans in place before in the future, before you have the funding, can be done. It just depends on your approach to the funding. So if you go through a municipal building authority bond, right, then you're not worried about whether it's going to be approved or not. Whereas if you know, hey, look, in the future the public is asking for this, and we are going to start moving towards that project, then it's just, let's go ahead and start designing and building and take the plans to the public saying, we want you to vote and approve this, right? Because then you've got your plans and the public knows what they're going to be getting with the money.
See that? Okay, just curious how that would actually really work, because it feels like we're working under a lot more limitations than like a private company like a hospital who really does know they are going to build, right? So okay, just curious.
There is a potential to slow things down. It's just being a lot more strategic and well thought out in the approach.
Well, and I think the public would appreciate seeing, like, knowing a few years in advance that this is what we're thinking about and we're going to need your support for. Like, I just think, yeah, that would be good practice.
That makes sense.
But also, like, the change reason, this is an existing condition as I understand it, and it says on here, Hogan has missed the coverage of road base and final grading under asphalt during the buyout phase, leading to a scope gap in coverage. So then, I don't know how much of that change order really should be covered by us versus if someone bids a project and they miss the part where, I'm going to oversimplify this. I'm sorry to whoever hears and is like, that's inappropriate, but like if you are like, I forgot we have to grade the road, so could you please add this on? I feel like, well, but you bid a project, surely you knew you had to grade the road. Now, that may not be the case here. I'm just saying in general, it's hard for me to know, when is this something, I feel like we always have to say yes to these things. I just do. But I always wonder, like, is there a penalty for someone not thinking through and including all the parts? That's all. Sorry, I'm sorry.
No, you're
No, but you're asking the right question, like sometimes we may not be the one at fault of this, and should we be approving this?
Yeah, like if we don't know there's clay, that may be different than we don't know that we need to put asphalt down.
And so what they call that in construction is called unforeseen conditions, right? If there's an unforeseen condition that they couldn't or know how to bid, right, then
that feels different than I forgot.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. And this this one,
I'm
and
not
that's.
saying this is, I forgot about it, by the way. I'm
Yep.
not, I'm just saying.
It seems that way a little bit though, right?
Yep, and that's the hard part when you go into these CMGC type contracts is even these are on us because they're saying that, hey, look, you're buying and building a school and that doesn't and every school is gonna have this in it. So just because we missed it doesn't mean it's on us, under those construction manager projects.
How about, sorry, I'm gonna complain about one more thing.
You're
Since we're in the mood to complain, let's go for it. Um, what about sometimes like the timeliness of these? Like it's like, ooh, we forgot, we gotta have this tomorrow.
Yep.
Like, is there any way we can encourage them to remember earlier?
And the reason, here's the issue with these ones, okay? There's another one that hasn't come through. The reason these are coming through is because they are on Timpview and Wasatch, and there are two schools that are up against timelines, right? So the asphalt up at Timpview, if we don't approve that, it will essentially be left as a mud pit until next fall, spring.
Right.
And this one, if we don't approve this one right now, it potentially will delay them moving forward with the project, and we're already up against that 6-month extension window that we've already been granted. So the reason these are coming forward on these projects is because we're up against a timeline, and we just don't have that extra couple weeks to just still sit on it. So.
And I guess one question then I would also ask is if we're paying for a consultant, maybe, again, this is just showing how ignorant I am. So I know I know I don't know what I'm talking about, but could they look through, I mean, I think the scope is just so huge, but could they look through it and sort of be watching for pieces and saying, hey, I don't see this in here.
And that, yep.
You know what I mean?
And
Maybe we catch things a little sooner even. I don't know.
And that goes back to my point of slowing down because if we go back on the timeline of some of these projects, right, we had an internal individual that ended up leaving, and then I essentially jumped in to try to figure out where everything was at. Then we ended up hiring one of these consultants, and that consultant came in after all of this had been right, and so
right. Some of it's on us because
Right.
we gave ourselves these timelines, right?
Yep.
I just wanted to say, I know construction management is not an easy thing, and there's probably a lot
Right.
we don't know. So I totally acknowledge that, and people go to college to get degrees to do that, so I get it. There's a lot involved. From our standpoint, though, when we are
It's not
continually
fun paying these.
approving these like last minute things, it gets a little bit tiring of having to say yes. We're feeling like we have to say yes over and over and over again. So I mean, that's all. I guess maybe that's some feedback.
And that's partly too with the difference between a renovation versus a brand new build, right? Renovation, you have a lot more unforeseen conditions than you do with a brand new build, which is why you're not seeing them at Shoreline. Right?
But we are with Wasatch, which is a new build.
That's because of the site.
Okay. Will you really quickly, you just brought it up, that 6-month extension on our lease, using the old building at Wasatch, when does that end? I'm just curious what that date is about. Is it December?
No, it's a little bit past that. So
Okay.
There's not much window past that, but it's enough that if a little bit of pushback happens on the project,
That we could kind
we'll
of,
be okay for a couple months, but that we don't have much past December.
per BYU, BYU's like, that's,
BYU is saying,
we're ready to.
you know, they need their projects are dependent on when we get out
Okay.
of that. So,
Could we go ahead and talk about the fencing one?
yep.
I love this discussion, but we also have a lot to get to.
Yeah, I just looked at the clock and realized we're 38 minutes behind. Anybody else have any complaints or comments?
I'm so sorry.
I'm sorry, that was a total joke, and it was very
No.
unprofessional. I was
I
participating in it,
just want to
but
say I'm so grateful
I
for
am
the
too.
good work
I
that's
am so
happening, and
grateful
I
too.
know it's that I don't understand.
it's
I'm sorry.
the
You're
same
good.
with
Good
me,
discussion.
but it's also our one of our things, one of our stewardships is to protect the money of the district, and so I think we're just trying to balance that between.
Well, and
right.
with 3 projects going on, there's always they're big. These are always big dollars, right, that are coming forward. And so it feels like, oh my gosh, but just keep in mind that we do have a $2 million contingency essentially on Wasatch and a $2 million contingency on Shoreline. Timpview, we just approved essentially that increase to, or that, reapproving the contingency back up to the 1.8 million. And so that's really where these are landing right now, is those contingency budgets. And if I have to come back to you for something and say, I will let you know, this is going to increase the total budget of the project.
Right, that's
meaning
different.
more money than we've allocated previously. Everything as up to this point is just hitting contingency.
So we're prepared for this, right?
Yes.
So this shouldn't be
Yes.
completely unacceptable until we get to that point where we have to go above and beyond our contingency, and that's where it gets a little bit more tricky.
Bingo.
Okay. All right. Thank you for letting me be a little bit snarky and unprofessional.
Okay, so the third and final item is fencing. So the fencing is coming forward just due to the risk of what we have up at Wasatch. This one, I apologize, is the $149,000. And this would be, and you can see the map there of where all the fencing will go. And what this will do is give us some protection around somebody going over there and getting injured and saying that we are negligent because we didn't provide any kind of barrier around this.
I have a quick question though. So when I'm looking at the invoice here or whatever, it does say due to school board concerns, an audit was performed, we're going to put these fences up. So when I read that, I think though there was no plan for fencing before concerns were brought up. So what was the initial plan? What I'm worried about happening now, and I know this is silly because I'm the one who's, from my constituents, brought up this concern and maybe fencing or something. I don't want to rush on this and put these fences up that, are they going to be effective? Are they going to be awful looking? Just because we're like, okay, this is what we need to do. So my question is, was there a plan before concerns were brought up on these walls?
No, I do not believe there was any plan. And so I think this is a very valid thing that got brought up, because had they put something in, when we approached them asking, hey, what's the plan for around this, they would have said, oh, it's this. This is what was in the original plan for the build out, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing that was in the plans, and so that's why this is coming forward saying, here's this request.
Is there any reason why we can't wait on this one, since our site's not done anyway, and then we can maybe get some renderings and someone to come talk to us about this is exactly where it's going to be and how it's going to be safe, and the gates won't have access to the students, and those kinds of things.
Yep. So where it's exactly going to be, I guess I'm thinking is that picture.
I see where it's going to be, but to see a picture, a rendering of like, here's the wall, this is what the fence looks like above it.
I gotcha.
Is it some of it looks like it's like the black chain link versus a regular chain link. All of that.
This is all chain link, but yeah, I can easily have them. I think this one would be the one that potentially might not. I will have to ask and reach out on this one because they brought these ones to me as they needed to be approved. I know the underlayment definitely, or the one that's 115 needs to be approved because that one is contingent on moving forward with that area. I don't know if this is just due to we can drill into the top of the concrete blocks pretty much at any time. I can always go back on this one and we can ask. I don't think this one is going to be a critical timing issue as much as the other one, but I can easily go back.
If it is, we don't want to hold them. If they need to know before they do certain things, we don't want to cause it out to be more money because we didn't do it in the right order. I also don't want to rush into it and it looks bad. There's certain construction projects, even recently, where I'm like, if I had known, if no one told us it was going to look a certain way, or if we had known, we could have asked some more questions and maybe affected it to be better, right? We want to do it right.
Yep. And we can absolutely consider other fencing options or things like this to go from chain link to essentially decorative ornamental metal, it's about 4 times more expensive.
Yeah, that's not.
So just keep that in mind. And so that's why we always often recommend just chain link, just due to the cost. The other thing though is that I think as I was up there the other day looking at it, wondering, the chain link might blend in with the block, right? As you look up at it, because the block is gray. And so you might not even really see it if you're down below looking up at it, except for potentially that top layer. Because you'll be looking at a gray fence with the backdrop of a gray block wall.
Unless we put trees there and then it sticks out
So,
against
yeah.
the trees.
Really, I'll be really quick. So on that front, those front walls on Locust and 820, if I'm looking though, it looks like they're just 2 layers of fencing. So probably the top and the bottom, because the middle you wouldn't need anything, right? Because anyone from the bottom would have, and then from the top. Does that make sense?
On the bottom layer, there's only 2 block walls.
Are there only 2?
There's only 2.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
So could we potentially see what it's like to have ornamental on the top layer that's visible and then
Yeah,
chain
yeah.
link underneath?
Yep, absolutely.
Because that makes sense to me and that feels like a good compromise.
I can always go back and ask them that and have them give us an estimate of what it would take to make the top an ornamental and everything else the regular.
I'm
Around
just
the
gonna play devil's advocate on this. Do any of our other schools have ornamental fencing?
They do, from what I understand, around kindergarten areas, but I don't know
I'm just
everywhere.
thinking like Rock Canyon, it's chain link.
Do any of our schools have these retaining walls though? Like this
Yes,
large?
so the back of Rock Canyon has chain link above it. On the back
Okay.
there.
I would just like to see some renderings even.
I mean, just like this is like on top of these.
Yeah, I'm just, so
Massive
the
wall.
back of Rock Canyon, when they rebuilt that,
Yeah, I know
was,
what you're talking about.
was a big retaining wall. And on the very top of it is a big chain link fence
Yeah,
on the top.
okay.
That's a good point. So maybe I take mine back.
I just, if we get into this point where they're gonna get it, then others are gonna go, well, we want ours to look
Yeah,
pretty
no,
too.
you're right.
So,
Yes, I think though I'm saying this in context of how overbearing the retaining walls are
I
on
agree.
that site.
They
Like
are
it's very
large.
I just trying, yeah, like I said, I don't, just want to be thoughtful, not rush, that's all.
And can't you do like black chain link? Like
We could,
yeah. Yeah, I would just like to see a rendering. See
There's pink, red, and orange on this?
So they're just
Oh, I see
saying
orange.
color
Just to
they're gonna do it
differentiate,
is
So the
galvanized
orange is
chain
along
link.
the sidewalk
orange,
where,
that was
Black coated in the pink.
yes, there's a key over here
orange,
too.
is there
Orange
pink
is along the
around?
sidewalk on Locust Lane.
So like,
I'm not seeing pink anywhere, just the orange and red.
All is the difference is Lisa is 6-inch galvanized chain link versus 4-inch galvanized chain.
So my guess is those are just
Oh, okay, so yeah, you're right.
yeah.
I don't see any pink. I only see red and orange as well.
All right, well,
Well, then I'm okay going forward with it, honestly. I don't know that I need to see a drawing of chain link. I feel like I've seen it.
I'm sorry, I know I don't mean to be a pain about this, just want to be thoughtful.
Yeah, that's okay.
no, I agree. At least 2 weeks till our next board meeting, right?
Okay, well, I guess when it's time to make the motion, we can figure it out then, right? Someone can make the motion to do whatever or not do whatever, right? And we can settle it then? Okay.
Perfect.
All right. That's some great discussions today. Okay. I will now entertain a motion to adjourn our study session.
I move we adjourn study session.
Okay, we are adjourned from study session. Is everyone okay taking a 5-minute break before we go into business meeting, or do you want to just dig right in?
How about let's go right in?
let's
and
do
then
the
we can
business
take a break.
meeting and then
And
have
then
a
take a
break
break.
for
Okay,
the
great,
executive.
perfect. Okay, awesome. Well then, everybody, welcome to our business meeting. It is Friday, September 29th, 2023, 1:49 p.m. Today we are convened as the Provo City School District Board of Education. We're meeting at 280 West, 940 North in Provo, Utah. And we're going to start our business meeting today with a roll call, and this time we will start with Lisa.
Lisa Boyce, board member.
Derek Anderson, Business Administrator.
Sorry, I should have started with Derek. I'm getting that all wrong.
Terry McCade, board member.
Jennifer Partridge, vice president.
Rebecca Nielsen, board president.
Wendy Douse, superintendent.
Gina Hales, board member.
Meg Van Wagenen, board member.
Melanie Hall, board member.
Okay, and welcome to everyone else online and to our cabinet members and to our student board member, Will Widener. Are we supposed to include you in that roll call, Will? Do you want to? We have before. Go ahead.
Will Widener, student rep.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Is there a motion to convene our business meeting?
I move that we convene our business meeting.
Thank you so much. Motion made by board member Boyce. Is there a second?
I second.
Second by board member Hales. We're now officially in our business meeting. We are going to start today with item number 4 on our agenda, consideration to approve a large purchase request, and we'll be talking first about the road base. Derek.
Yep. So what you have before you, board, is a request for to put in road base for our parking lot that they're prepping for. The cost of that is $115,162.20. So I asked the board to approve that, based on the discussion that we had in study session.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Is there a motion to approve?
I move that we approve the large purchase request in the amount of $115,162.20 for the road base at Wasatch Elementary.
Thank you so much. Motion made by board member Hall. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by board member Hales. Is there any further comments or discussion, starting with board member Hall, if there's any? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and take a vote. All in favor with aye? Aye. Any opposed with nay? Okay, that motion passes unanimously. Item number 5, consideration to approve large purchase request. This is in regards to the Timpview parking lot. Derek.
Yep. So what you have before you is putting in more road base underneath the parking lot, the east parking lot at Timpview. What ended up happening is they were tearing out the existing asphalt. They encountered unforeseen conditions, which was that there was not adequate base underneath it, and so it's pretty much just clay. And so this is an ask of $249,347.80 to correct that, so that way this is mitigates accelerated failure times of these of asphalt.
Okay. Thank you so much. Is there a motion to approve?
I move that we approve the large purchase request in the amount of $249,347.80 for the parking lot at Timpview.
Thank you so much. Motion made by board member Van Wagenen. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by board member Boyce. Any further comments or discussion, starting with board member Van Wagenen, if there's any?
No.
Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and vote. All in favor with aye?
Aye.
Any opposed with nay? Motion passes unanimously.
All right, so the next one I have to bring before you is fencing at the Wasatch Elementary. This would be along all of the walls of our property, where those were to prevent and provide safety measures to prevent fall. And so what we have before you is an ask of $147,185.88 for that. For your consideration.
Okay, thank you so much, Derek. Is there a motion?
I move that we approve the large purchase request in the amount of $147,185.88 for fencing at Wasatch Elementary.
Thank you so much. Motion made by board member Boyce. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by board member Hall. Any further comments or questions, starting with board member Boyce, if there's any? Go ahead, Jennifer.
I don't feel comfortable voting on it today because I think we can have some time to look at some more renderings and just make sure that we know what we're approving as far as the look, and that we can feel comfortable with it once it does go up moving forward. So I will vote no on this and hope that we could talk about it in October instead.
Okay, Meg?
Well, can we make like a second motion to table it and
You can.
revisit? So how do I say that?
I believe it's a substitute motion.
Oh, okay, I just would like to make a substitute motion that we revisit this at our next meeting. October 12th
I
meeting.
think the right word is table this.
Table this, thank you.
Yeah.
So I would like to make a substitute motion that we table this item until our October 12th meeting.
Okay.
Grab.
Okay, so we have a substitute motion on the table by Board Member Van Wagenen. Is there a second to that motion? Okay, seconded by Board Member Partridge. Is there any further discussion or comments on that motion? So the current motion on the table is to table this.
The only thing I just want Derek to clarify for us that if by us postponing this by 2 weeks, where does that put us with the timeline? Are we going to be missing deadlines to get fencing?
I don't believe that this one will cause a delay on the project just due to it being the fencing. The road base was more the critical one.
Okay, then I don't have a problem waiting 2 weeks. So,
And are we clear what we're waiting for so that we don't just have the same conversation in 2 weeks?
That's a good one. So what we're asking for is renderings,
New
right?
renderings with potential fencing options and the cost is what I'm understanding.
With other options and the cost increase.
And that can be done in 2 weeks.
Should be able to.
Is there anything else anybody feels like they need to know?
How much does that cost?
Just to get the estimate of, what the change in material would be and the cost, that won't cost us anything to go back and do that.
Okay. Anybody else have anything they want to see before we bring it back?
I hadn't seen it until our walkthroughs on Wednesday. If you haven't been there, if anyone hasn't been there yet, I suggest you go to the site. Like, if we had gone to the site before we voted on where to put the school, I would have changed my vote.
Okay. Okay, then I think we're ready to vote. So all in favor with aye?
Aye.
Aye.
I too, but
Substitute motion.
It's a
The
sec-
tabling.
second
Yeah,
motion.
substitute motion, okay. Any opposed? Okay, that passes
passes.
unanimously to table that. So we'll table that until our October 12th meeting. All right, that's all we have for our business meeting today. Is there a motion to adjourn our business meeting?
I move that we adjourn the business meeting.
Okay, thank you. We're adjourned. And we will go ahead and take, I'm going to say a 5-minute break, knowing it'll probably be 10 by the time everyone gets back here. But so we're going to take a 5-minute break, and we're going to try and reconvene for our executive session by 2:06 p.m.
Some of us do have to.